Good evening, everyone. All right, my name is Allison Land. I work for the City of Bastrop in the Planning Department. We also have Abram Barker. He's from Bastrop County. He'll be up here speaking as well. He's their floodplain administrator, and we are here to share some information about FEMA floodplain changes. All right, we'll go over floodplain administration, what the goals are, why we do it, some basic floodplain terminology. That way you know what we're talking about when you start talking to your insurance providers, or if you choose to permit something and we start talking about different zones and start using some of this terminology, you know what it is. We'll talk about areas with changes and impacts. If you live in the city of Bastrop, who lives in the city of Bastrop? Yeah, okay. There are some pretty significant changes along Gills Branch and Piney Creek, so we'll talk about those a little bit. We will provide you some resources, show you some websites where you can get some information at a later date. And we will talk about impacts to property owners, changes to flood insurance, and making sure that you're aware of permit requirements and that sort of thing. All right, so goals of floodplain administration. We are here to ensure the health, safety, and economy of the community. We want to improve the safety of people and animals. You know, that can be your family member pet, that could be livestock that gives you economic value. We want to ensure that all of that is safe. We want to lower the amount of damaged property. You know, obviously it's an inconvenience for you when your property is damaged, but that's also, you know, a burden on the community as well. That means you're busy taking care of your property instead of doing other things that may benefit the community, and reduce economic losses accrued as a result of damaged property. The city and the county both have a role in floodplain administration. We adopt and implement ordinances that meet or exceed the National Flood Insurance Program, and we will talk a little bit more about the flood insurance program in a moment. We review all development in flood-prone areas and issue permits accordingly. So chances are, if you're here, you probably live in a flood-prone area, right? So we'll talk about what that regulation looks like and what permits you may need. We coordinate at all local or at all levels of government, right? So floodplain is regulated at the local level, county level, state level, federal level. We all try to work together and make sure that these regulations make sense and are comprehensive. We also balance economic gain of floodplain development against resulting increases in flood hazards. Communicate risks to citizens. That's why we're here today. We want to make sure that you guys are aware of the map changes and the insurance changes so that you can make informed decisions. We regulate and guide development to minimize risk. That's why we have standards. If you're going to do something in the floodplain, not all communities let you. We do, but we do have rules. Plan for evacuation, public service impacts. You know, we have hazard mitigation plans, flood readiness stages. You know, different people are responsible for checking different things in the event of a flood. You know, are the culverts clear? Do we have an evacuation route? Where are we going? What stuff are we bringing with us? Okay. And we identify mitigation opportunities. This one the city and county have been working really hard on, and there are still studies going on. You know, these new maps are the results of some of those studies. You know, we've studied, we'll get into it more, but you know, we have done studies along Gills Branch, Piney Creek, several other creeks, and we have better information now. And so we can take that better information, give it to FEMA. FEMA maps it, does their thing, runs their models, and gives us better information from which we can regulate and all be informed. Why do we do it? Texas is top 3 for flood damage in the US. It alternates between us, Louisiana, and Florida, depending on who gets most hurricanes. Bastrop County in particular is subject to riverine and shallow flooding. There are definitely some local drainage problems. You know, sometimes there's just a low spot where things can't make it downhill. We've had 10 declared disasters in the last 10 years, half of which are water related, right? 4 floods and Harvey. NFIP participation, that's a National Flood Insurance Program. That allows all of you to obtain flood insurance. If we don't have minimal standards adopted, then we don't qualify for this program, which means y'all are out of luck with the flood insurance. We also make sure that we have updated maps in areas of impact. So I'm going to turn it over to Abram here to talk about the National Flood Insurance Program. He's got some great information for you.
All right, how are y'all doing tonight? Oh, great. Glad y'all could come out. So I'm Abram Barker. I'm the floodplain administrator for the county. A little bit about me. I have a bachelor's and a master's in geology. I'm an Aggie and a Razorback. And so when they played a couple weekends ago, I couldn't lose. Okay. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad y'all are here tonight. And a couple of important things to note about why we participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. It's the mechanism that FEMA uses to distribute all of its disaster funds. So if there's a wildfire, there's a tornado, there's a hurricane, there's just flooding, it's all going to pass through this program. And so sometimes you're going to hear about somebody having a wildfire and their house burning down off Cottletown Road, and then you're asking, why is the floodplain administrator out there? He deals with floods. And that's because part of our job is to do damage assessments. Part of our job is to determine, okay, is that particular property, is that particular home substantially damaged? And if it is, then we have to work with the property owner to help them understand what are your options, okay? The participation in the program, there's some minimums, but we go above and beyond, and that's for your benefit. So in the county, we have a Class 8 level within a program within the National Flood Insurance Program called the Community Rating System. Okay? The more that a community or a jurisdiction does to regulate outreach to the community, to educate the people, then what FEMA says is, you're going above and beyond. We're going to give the policyholders a discount. Okay, and if you're in the county, that's a 10% discount off your premiums. If you're in the city, they don't participate in the program yet. They're considering it. But if they do, then those discounts could become available in the future. Okay? And the discount can be up to the highest classification, a level 1, which you would get a 45% discount off of your premiums. Okay? There's only 1 or 2 communities in the United States that has that classification. One of them is Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's pretty impressive. It's a lot of work, and y'all get to reap the benefits of it. Okay, where's the clicker? You got the clicker? All right. Okay. So another thing to consider is that the state also has rules. They have the Texas Water Code. And the Texas Water Code basically states you can't adversely impact your neighbor. So you can't fill in the creek at the back of your property and then back up water onto your neighbor, or just divert the whole thing onto your neighbor. Can't do that. And if your neighbor decides to sue you, they're going to sue you underneath the Texas Water Code, and they're probably going to win. Okay? So that's just something to think about. So here's a statistic for you. For flood insurance in Bastrop County, only 6% of homes in the county have flood insurance if they're in the floodplain. Okay? That 6% has paid out $3.6 million over the life of the program. Okay? Now that's not including the other $3.3 million that's been paid out in flood insurance policies outside the floodplain. Okay? Another thing to consider, so that's why we really want to talk about flood insurance. I know some of y'all have it in this room, and that's fantastic. You're protecting yourselves. You're protecting your property. For those of you who don't have flood insurance, for those of you who know folks who might need flood insurance, have that chat with them. Talk with them. Say, you might want to consider flood insurance. And we're going to talk about why here in a second. So over 60% of homes that flood in the United States on national average are not in the floodplain. Okay, so you look at those maps and you say, over half of the homes outside of that blue and orange area, they're probably going to flood. It's kind of a scary thought, but it's some of what they've discovered through the years. Okay, here's the next important thing to note, is that presidential declaration disaster monies, so when the president says, Hurricane Ida, we're going to designate this area as a presidential declaration area, so we can get FEMA in there, we can get funds in there, so people can get some help. What that money is to help you live while you rebuild. Okay, the average payout from an individual assistance claim through a presidential declaration is only $5,500. You can't build a house on $5,500, although people have tried. Okay, so that's where flood insurance comes in. Flood insurance is the intended monies to be able to rebuild your home. Okay, you can cover up to $250,000 of the home. If you have a business, you can cover up to $500,000. If you have a condo, I think you can also cover up to $250,000. So let's say you have a condo on the coast and you want to get flood insurance for it, or you're required to get flood insurance for it. There are policies available for just your particular condo. Another thing to consider is it also covers the contents. So let's say all of your couches flood, those nice armoires, that wooden furniture, hopefully that IKEA furniture that didn't float away, you know, that's still there. But that contents coverage is going to cover replacement of all of that, and not in addition to rebuilding the home. And so here's the next big kicker. You have to pay for flood insurance, but how much are you going to pay? Under the current system, it's entirely related to your floodplain zone and how high you are relative to that zone. As of October 1st, that is no longer the case. FEMA has changed fundamentally how it calculates premiums. It's no longer based on if you're inside or outside the floodplain. It's no longer based on, am I above the base flood or am I below? Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And it's a really important topic, and I strongly recommend you contact, if you have your own flood insurance policy, or your lender if they're carrying the flood insurance policy. So we're going to jump over to some basics here in regards to the flood to these maps and the report that goes with them. So we've got the flood insurance study here. This is the nuts and bolts of the changes that are happening. This is the report that says this is the base flood elevation, and this is the data that we use to get that elevation. These are the areas that we studied. These are the areas where a map revision was accepted, and we're going to continue to use it. Okay? So that's what we deal with on a day-to-day basis, is looking through that report. Surveyors look through that report. It's publicly available. You can always find it through the FEMA Map Service Center. Okay. So an important thing to note about these maps back here is that you're going to notice that they have more squiggly lines in them because they have more detail to them. And that's because part of the mapping process, they've integrated in new topographic information, new topographic data that is a lot more detailed, a lot more accurate, It's not 100%, and I'm not sure we'll ever get to something that's 100%, but it's better than what we had before, okay? Because sometimes you might have a person on a hill and they're saying, hey, I'm in a hill, but I'm still in a floodplain. And FEMA says, well, with the map we have from 1985, that's the best we could do. So we're trying to make efforts to improve, to make it more realistic. And the way we've been doing that as a county and as a city is that we've been partnering with the Texas Water Development Board, with the state, as part of a grant to study each of the watersheds in the county. And that's what caused these maps to be changed. So we did the studies. FEMA looked at the studies and they said, okay, we've got good data here, let's update the maps. And that's exactly what they've done. So the areas that have been changed, you're going to see Piney Creek, you're going to see Gaisley Creek, Willow Creek, Cedar Creek, Dry Creek on the Travis County line. And part of that is because they're rapidly growing areas. They're right in the middle of Smithville. They're right in the middle of Bastrop. They're out on Cedar Creek where Austin is just coming right up, right into the county. Okay? And so we're trying to be proactive, help people to protect themselves, help them be aware of the hazard, because last thing we want is somebody, in their car floating away. Last thing we want is somebody who builds a new house down in a low spot and they don't realize this is a floodplain just because we've got some old data. Okay. One of the big things you're going to note about these maps is that there is orange, blue, and red stripes on them. Okay, those are 3 different designations, and those designations relate to what the floodplain zone is. I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but that's okay. So the blue zone is the most important zone for you. It's the zone A, AE, AO. Anything with an A is going to be your 100-year floodplain, also known as the 1% annual chance flood. They're getting, FEMA and the whole industry is getting away from 100-year, 500-year, and they're moving towards these percentages. And I think it's because of what they're trying to convey is that there is a 1% chance flood, so that statistically, a 1% chance flood per year of this level of storm happening, versus you're only going to flood once every 100 years if you're in this area. And so that's the approach they're trying to take, and I think it's a good one. And so you have the orange area as the next area, and that's going to be your traditional 500-year floodplain. Now they're calling it the 0.2% and X shaded. Okay, so if you're in an area and your insurance agent is saying, hey, you're in an X shaded, that means you're in the 500-year. It means you're in the 0.2%. And then the X unshaded is everything else that's outside of the regulated floodplain, that's outside of what they map, and that's just X or area of minimal flooding. Doesn't mean that you're exempt from flooding or that you won't flood, because as we saw, over 60% of homes flood in that zone. Okay, so Allison's going to talk a little bit about the maps specific to the city of Bastrop and the changes, and she's going to walk you through some of these zones in a more visual way.
All right, so this is an example of one of the firms. We picked just downtown. Everyone's familiar with downtown for the most part. So here is that orange zone. So this is your 0.2% annual chance of flooding, previously known as the 500-year floodplain. That is that X shaded zone. As you can see, it's on both sides of the river. The blue area here as Abram was saying, that's your 1% annual chance. And the red crosshatched area is the regulatory floodway. Okay, so when you think about a creek or a river flooding, there's always a portion that goes deeper and faster, right? That's what the floodway is in very basic terms. All right, so we talked about this a little bit. Your regulatory floodway, that's where you expect water to be moving deep and fast. That's where you're more likely to get swept away, where you're more likely to have structures collapse. Your pier and beam foundations give out. Your base flood elevation, that's the anticipated water level rise. So when you're talking about, once you get into permitting or you talk about your insurance, you're going to hear about base flood elevations, finished floor elevations, and you start hearing that elevation terminology. And what we're talking about is at what elevation do we expect that water to be, and where is your building in relation to that? Are you higher than it? Are you lower than that? And it gives you an estimation of where are you in relation to the water. Okay, and when you hear about base floods, those are the floods having a 1% chance of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. So that is essentially your fundamental flood area where it is expected for water to go. All right. So here's a picture illustrating that. We have our stream channel. Think of this as the Colorado River. Okay, that's where you see water every day, day in and day out. As you go up the shoreline, you get up to your base flood elevation. So when you have that really large flood event, that's where you expect that water to go, right? Here in the floodway, that's where you expect that water to be moving really deep and really fast, okay? This floodway fringe, that's the difference between the floodway and the blue area on the map, right? So this 1% annual chance, that's your blue area, and the county and the city will both let you build in that area with some regulation. All right. A couple other things that you may hear talked about in regards to floodplains are LOMRs, which are letters of map revision. Usually those don't affect individual property owners very often. Most people who file LOMRs are large developments, and they're looking to increase buildable area to put homes or buildings or whatever. So you'll see examples of that with Pecan Park. They did LOMRs, and the Colony, on the portion that's east of 969. They both did that. And what they do is they evaluate, okay, how is the water moving through here? If we do a lot of engineering and adjust the soils and all this technical information, and we increase our buildable area, how does that affect things? And so they run the engineering on that. FEMA looks at it, and then they will issue a letter of map revision. And so when you're looking at buying property, what may have been in a 100-year floodplain before Pecan Park was developed, now that they've done the LOMR, it probably pulled that house out of the 100-year floodplain with that new study and with how they developed. Letters of map amendment, those are more applicable to individual property owners. Those are looking at a property in relation to the special flood hazard area. So you may come across a need for one of those. Say you're a house on a hill and you're in a high spot, but the flood maps just aren't quite that specific, and they have you in a flood hazard zone. They have you in that 1% annual chance zone. Well, you can do a letter of map amendment where you provide data that shows, hey, there's a hill here, we're on a high spot, our elevations, our floor is elevated, and you can get a letter of map amendment, and that will change your insurance requirements. That will acknowledge that, yes, you are in a high spot. All right.
Okay, elevation certificates. Who all here has a home that has an elevation certificate with it? Okay, we got one. I wish I had door prizes, man. Okay, thank you for doing that, because that's going to help you in the long run. For everybody else in the room, I'd encourage you to get elevation certificates on your homes. It's going to do a couple of things for you. It's going to give you a really good idea of where you fit relative to all the floodplain management rules. It's going to improve your premiums on your flood insurance. And it's going to allow you, if you decide to buy or sell that home, that you can take that to closing. And then if you have flood insurance, you can actually transfer that flood insurance policy to the new owner. With that elevation certificate, that new owner, the lender, is going to be a lot more comfortable about taking that transfer. Uh-huh. And so he's just mentioning how he was forced to do an elevation certificate, and that is because lenders use the elevation certificate to determine which zone you're in, how are you relative to that zone elevation-wise, so that they can go get flood insurance, because they have to have it for flood insurance. One of the big changes that has happened as of October 1st, though, is that you are not required anymore to get an elevation certificate to be able to get flood insurance. Okay, they're trying to make it more accessible for folks to be able to get flood insurance. Hiring a professional surveyor or an engineer to do it's going to cost some hundreds of dollars. And so for folks who may not want to spend that kind of money, they want to make it more accessible, insurance more accessible for them. However, I recommend that you still go through the process of an elevation certificate even with these changes, because what it's going to do is it's going to pay for itself after a few years because of the better premium it's going to give you. It's going to help the insurance company to determine, okay? Because it's going to provide a lot more information than what they would normally get, and they don't have to make as many assumptions. So from a regulatory standpoint, we still require elevation certificates on new structures. So if you're going to put in a new home, a new barn, anything enclosed, we still are going to require that elevation certificate as part of our floodplain management regulations, because we still have to show, is it above or is it below? And if it's a home, we have to elevate above. If it's below and it's a barn, we can flood-proof it, or you can elevate, but there's multiple techniques to be able to fit our rules. Okay, so elevation certificate still required for the county and the city, but not required, but recommended for your flood insurance and the lender. Yes, sir. Ma'am. Okay, so here's she's asking, does elevation certificates only apply to the blue zones, the 100-year floodplain, the zone A, AE? Yes, for floodplain management purposes, because we only regulate to the floodplain of the zone A or the 1%. However, if your lender is still going to require you during this transition period to get an elevation certificate and it's outside the floodplain, that's entirely up to the lender. They might still require that, but I would say 90%, if not more, they're not, especially with these new changes. So another thing to consider is, what's the possibility of this home getting mapped into a floodplain in the future? So if you already have that elevation certificate with the designated base flood elevation, it's good for the life of that structure, regardless of if a new floodplain comes along. And so if you have a home that's in a low-lying area, but it's not in a floodplain right now, but you think it might be in the future, go ahead, get the elevation certificate, and then you're going to know, okay, I can sell this over, people can be confident if there are changes, because we are going to have changes over the next 5-10 years, then we can be more confident in the sale, we can be more confident in obtaining flood insurance, etc. Okay. So, Allison, do you want me to skip through this, or do you want to chat more about it? Okay, back to Allison.
All right, so as I mentioned earlier, there are significant changes if you are inside the city limits along Gills Branch and Piney Creek. So this is a view of one of the interactive maps that we have available on the website. It's called the Flood Changes Viewer. We talked about the blue zones and the orange zones and the red striped zones. Well, this map highlights in yellow and in purple what changed. What's different from the effective maps today with the new data. Okay, so as you can see here, for reference, you have State Highway 95 along the right-hand side, State Highway 71 along the bottom here. This line, this barrier, is the railroad tracks. You have the Performing Arts Center and Cedar. You have Chestnut Street here in the middle. Okay, so the yellow area is area that has been added to the 1% annual chance area. So as you can see, that's a large area of town that is now in that regulatory floodplain. Okay. So the question is, it did in fact flood in the recent years, correct? So we do know that just based on people who live there, people who have local knowledge of the area, that there is water in those areas in heavy storms. And so now we have the data that actually backs that up. We have the studies that show, yes, that is an area of shallow flooding. That is going to be a regulatory floodplain with these new maps. There are a couple small areas down here that are going from the 1% annual chance to the 0.2% annual chance. But really this is your big impact area. Along Piney Creek, so this is the northern city limits line. Here's State Highway 95. As you can see, that has expanded as well. And a lot of that is just having better data on how that creek flows, better rainfall data, better topographic data. And so you have your orange areas, that's your 0.2% chance. These yellow areas are your new regulatory floodplain, your 1% annual chance. The yellow crosshatched area, that's a new 500-year floodplain. That's your new 0.2% annual chance. So it's expanded pretty significantly there as well. All right, and I'm going to pass it over to Abram for Cedar Creek.
Okay, I know most of y'all are down on the Colorado River, but anybody around Cedar Creek or have property around Cedar Creek? Yeah, okay. So there's a couple things you need to know about Cedar Creek, is that it has a regulatory floodway on a certain section of it, and that is expanding just a little bit. It's not going to be a big area that's going to be new, but we do see it right along here. I believe this is this might be 304. 20 this is 21 up here for everybody. And I can't remember which road that is right there, but it's one of the major thoroughfares. It might be 304. But what you're going to notice is that most of the yellow, not much purple. So most of the floodplain is expanding. Most of this area, it has larger tracks, few houses, but that's changing really fast right now. We're getting a lot of expansion from the city of Austin. There's a number of planned developments in the works. And so we're seeing a lot of expansion along this area. And so this is perfect timing to help advise people, help them understand their hazards, and to help protect them. Okay. And all of this was because we did those studies in conjunction with the state. If we hadn't done them, we wouldn't know about this. We wouldn't know that it's bigger than it has been mapped. But, ideally, we would like to see it get smaller, because that means that the flooding is smaller than, it's less than what they really mapped it as, but unfortunately we're not really seeing it that way. Okay, so other areas that are changing. So we've got Cedar Creek. The study did not include Walnut Creek in all of its tributaries. So that part of South Bastrop County was not included. It's not changing. You'll also notice that a lot of the upper little tributaries, the smaller creeks, the headwaters of these creeks are not changing. It's only the bigger channels, where more flow is occurring and where they can get a better handle on the numbers. Okay. Another area is Dry Creek. We have about 4 or 5 dry creeks in Bastrop County, and the one that's changing is along the Travis County state line, or county line. It almost seems like a state sometimes going over there. But and then we've got around Smithville, we've got Gaisley Creek, Willow Creek, and then at Bastrop, we've got Piney Creek and Gills Branch. Okay, so basically what they've done is FEMA says we're going to focus on the highest populated areas first, where it's going to make the most impact, and I think it has, and we're going to see how it plays out. Okay, so all of this is publicly available, and you can find it using the website that we provided some handouts for y'all, and all of these websites are on that for you. Unfortunately, this one comes with a really long URL, and so hopefully you can type it all in. It takes me about 10 minutes. Okay, so this is another map that it's a drawing that outlines in simple terms all the different drainages in the county. And something to consider is that we still have this grant that we're doing. We're still out there studying watersheds. We're still in the process of developing new maps. Okay, so we have the data for Alum Creek, Wilbarger Creek, Walnut Creek, and we're about to start the data studies on Pin Oak Creek and I think JD Creek and a few others here in the county, so that hopefully we can have almost all of the county mapped. So what you're going to be seeing and how this affects you is that these floodplain map changes are going to be happening on a fairly regular basis for the next 5 or 10 years. As we do these studies, as FEMA says this is good data, we're going to update our map, here's the new map. That process is going to happen a couple times, 3 times probably. Yes, sir. Okay, so sure. So I kind of shaped it in the way the county is shaped. Okay, so the north corner up here, that's Elgin. Where this middle star here, that's Bastrop. Where this south star is down here, that's Smithville. Okay, and so we've studied this western part. We've studied this northern part to a fair amount. We still got quite a bit to go on it. Almost all of the eastern part of the county has not been studied yet, but will be. Okay.
So you never done Tahitian Village?
So Tahitian Village, most of it is along the river, and the river is being revisited by the Corps of Engineers. They're doing a massive study from San Angelo all the way down to the bay. And who knows when they're going to finish it. Who knows what it's going to turn up. Okay, but they're the ones that are handling that beast. And we did partner with other jurisdictions and organizations back in the early 2000s to do a study. And out of that study came the regulatory floodway. But I know we really do need to get a new study going, and I think the Corps of Engineers is handling it. So it will be, I would suspect, quite some time before we see some changes on the Colorado itself.
So what if you've already have damage already? What do you do? What do we do? We live on the 5th, our property butts up to the 5th hole of the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
When Mr. Wedding onto our property. Nothing happened until the hurricane, and then we had 16, 18 inches of rain. We now have a ravine that is 10 feet deep,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody seems to want to do anything about it.
Okay. I think we've chatted about this before, if I'm not mistaken. But this is one of those cases where I'd be happy to chat with you afterwards on a case-by-case basis, because it depends a lot on whether you're inside or outside of the floodplain and how all of that relates jurisdictionally. Okay, because as a floodplain administrator for Bastrop County, my authority is very limited in certain areas of the county. So if it's within a 100-year floodplain, there's a lot of things that I can do to help mitigate flood hazards. But if it's not, and 87% of the county is outside of the floodplain, there's very little I can do, unfortunately, for folks. Yes, sir.
You already have a LOMA
Mm-hmm.
approved.
Mm-hmm.
Is that then guaranteed that the updated maps will continue to reflect that? Or when the new map comes out and you see the same mistake again, do you have to go through another LOMA to clarify that it is fine?
Okay, that's a great question.
Wrong again?
That is a great question. So he's asking about LOMAs. If you have an approved letter of map amendment and the map changes and you're concerned about, okay, are they going to take into account that LOMA? Are they going to honor that LOMA? That's where you need to look at that flood insurance study, because they're going to say everything that they accepted, everything that they rejected, everything that superseded. And so you'll want to take a look at the flood insurance study. And then you'll also want to check with, well, we can chat. You probably have to check with me about it, but yeah.
You have to go, you got to do it again?
You should not have, depends on whether or not they rejected it or not. If they did, then you might have to reapply. But I haven't seen any cases like that. That doesn't mean they don't happen, though.
And one other question, LOMR,
Mm-hmm.
like the example of the colony. In the preparation of the LOMR,
Mm-hmm.
is that approved in such a way that it has no adverse impact to any of the surrounding properties? Or can an LOMR generate negative impact on neighbor properties?
So his question is about if you do a letter of map revision, are you allowed to cause adverse impacts on your neighbors? Can you increase flows? Can you increase the amount of water that's ending up on your neighbors? The answer is no by the Texas Water Code. And we try to review letters of map revision in regard to that before, as part of the process with FEMA. I think FEMA also looks at it. It should be a negative impact. So if you go through a letter of map revision process and you're finding that there are fewer flows than before, or if you are doing something that causes less flow or less velocity, that's a good thing, because we want to be able to manage the flow off the property, but we don't want to make it worse. We want to make it better.
Unless you're upstream of that flow. Once you slow the flow down, upstream sucks up the problem.
So no adverse impact also applies upstream as well. So you're talking, they have to contain or manage what's coming onto their property. So they can't cause backups, they can't cause speed ups. Does that make sense? So
And if they do, there's repercussions.
then it falls to the Texas Water Code for adverse impact.
So we just dealt with this a couple years ago. After the construction was done, it was great. But during the construction, we had a lot of problems while they were doing all the leveling of the neighborhood and all that. And talking to the property management, they had a process that we went and talked to the people that were in charge, and they were really quick to take it. Like when we mentioned it, they freaked out a little bit because they knew that what the next step was. But from my experience, it's during construction
Okay. So if you go to the City of Bastrop website, here are some of the resources they have available. They mention the National Flood Hazard Layer, which is a great resource that shows you an interactive map where you can go and look at your property. You can go see where the floodplain is. That map changes viewer with the purple and the yellows, that's also available there. The hazard mitigation plan that we're doing an update on right now. And by the way, if you have public comment about hazards that you're concerned about in the county, we'd love to hear about them. There are going to be public meetings coming up, and we'd love to have y'all out there as feedback. Okay. And then some more information about the flood insurance program itself. So this is the floodplain management website for the county. It's a little different. We try to provide as much information as we can to explain the different things that we've talked about today in I would like to say simple terms, but it's not always. It has my information on there. It also importantly has the link to the Bastrop Central Appraisal District map so that you can look at the floodplain maps in relation to your property lines. So you can go to the Bastrop Central Appraisal District map and you can turn on the FEMA firm and the flood zones, and you can see on there exactly where the floodplain is relative to your property lines. I chatted with Central Appraisal was here earlier today, and they're interested in getting these preliminary maps up onto their website. And so they're going I'm hoping and that they will take the efforts to do that so that y'all have access to see those changes so you can go between map and look at your property lines and have a good idea of what's going on. FEMA also has great resources available through their websites. There's floodsmart.gov. There's the main FEMA floodplain management website. These are going to outline a lot of the minimum requirements. As county and city, we may have more stringent requirements, such as building 2 foot above a base flood elevation. Okay, so basically this is just a recap of what I just said. And do y'all have any questions about being able to view the floodplain maps or where to go? No? Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Allison. She's going to talk a little bit about appeals. So if you see something on the map and you're like, wait a second, I don't quite agree. There's something I don't like about this. Maybe I need to get an engineer involved. She's going to explain it to you.
All right, so the preliminary maps, getting those adopted is a multi-step process. They are available, and now we are in the appeal period. Okay, it started last Thursday on September 30th, and it is open for 90 days. Appeals are formal written objections to the map, all right? These are technical objections to the map. I want to reinforce that. You need to have scientific evidence showing that the information on the preliminary maps are scientifically or technically incorrect. So if you're looking at the maps and you see an area where you're really familiar with that area and it just doesn't quite make sense, it may be worth engaging a professional engineer or surveyor to help you put together that data. Once you have that data put together, you can submit that to the City of Bastrop Planning Department if the property and the area of concern is inside the city limits. If it's outside the Bastrop city limits, you'll submit that to Bastrop County Floodplain Administrator or the county judge. We will review that information. We have to make a statement on whether we agree or disagree with it, and we pass that on to FEMA for their review. So once they review it, they resolve every appeal. They'll say whether they agree with it, disagree with it, they're accepting it, not accepting it, and they will provide a letter that will be passed on to the appellant. If that data was in fact good data and they chose to accept it and it warrants a revision to the map, They will work on updating those maps. And then once they finalize all the appeal data, they will finalize those maps and send out a letter of final determination. Once they do that, those maps will be effective 6 months later. Okay? So once we have that, both the city and the county will be looking at those maps, evaluating our city ordinances, our county regulations, flood damage prevention orders, and making sure that there are not any updates needed there. I can tell you from the city perspective, there will be some code updates, some ordinance updates when we do that, when we reach that point. And as we mentioned earlier, we are attempting to participate in the CRS program as well. And so you may see some basic standards adopted there that are higher than the national flood insurance requirements, so that we can get those insurance discounts also. All right. Any engineers and surveyors in the room? No? All right. So as we've talked to you guys, you may want an elevation certificate after learning about some information today. And so the engineers and surveyors may see an increase in requests for those. They may also see an increase in need for floodplain development permits. That will affect you guys as well. Okay, if you are trying to put any sort of structure in a floodplain, you're going to need some kind of permit. You know, a development permit with Bastrop County, or a floodplain development permit, an associated building permit if you're in the city limits. And there is a hierarchy for what we consider best available data. Sometimes you hear your permitting offices talk about, oh, best available data is this or that. It depends on what data is available on the property of interest, right? So we do have, you know, our new flood insurance studies. We have the current flood insurance studies, and they have been studied to various levels. The detailed studies, those include some of the watershed studies that you see happening in the county that Abram talked about earlier. If we have that data available and that's the best available, then your engineers and your surveyors should be using that data. Base level engineering is a great planning resource that's available countywide, and very rarely should we ever need this approximate A zone anymore since we have base level engineering. But that is the bottom of the ranking there. This slide speaks more with how you fill out an elevation certificate. I'm going to skip over that for y'all. That's all right. So as we talked about, additional property is in a flood hazard zone. So if you are planning on buying or selling real estate, check the maps, be informed, know where you are and what your risk is. There is a little bit of property that may have changed classification. Another thing to consider is if you see a piece of property that you want to buy, or if you own property and you want to do a major remodel and you want to substantially improve that structure, depending on the value of the structure existing and the value of those improvements, that may trigger compliance with the flood damage prevention orders, right? Maybe that structure was constructed prior to any of these rules being adopted. Depending on how major the amount of work being done is, you may have some compliance things to think about with that remodel. So just be aware of that, take it into consideration, come talk to your floodplain administrators about what that might mean for you if you're contemplating a very large project on property in the floodplain. And then, of course, if you're rebuilding after you've had damage, you'll go through all of the processes for that, and making sure that when you rebuild, you're rebuilding in better compliance. And hopefully that will mitigate your future potential for damage. All right. So as Abram talked about, your flood insurance rates may change. All right. With the new Ratings 2.0, there are a lot more variables, and Abram will talk more about that. But there are a lot more things taken into consideration. You know, it used to be, are you in this zone or that zone, and that's your rate. Now they're looking at a lot of other factors. And so it makes your rates more customizable to your actual risk. So if you have, that may mean your rates go up, or that may mean your rates go down, right? So if you are elevated in a very secure building and you have flood mitigation features in your home, you may have a lower rate. But if you're built below the base flood elevation and it's not as sturdy, or you don't have mitigation measures on your property, your rates may actually go up a little bit. It all depends on the specifics to your property. As I mentioned earlier, you will need some sort of permit if you are doing development on the property within that 100-year flood zone area. That's where we regulate, that's where we require permits. Permits are always required, it's just a matter of if you have flood considerations on it as well. And then Abram's going to talk more about risk rating 2.0.
Okay, who would love to see their flood insurance premiums go down?
Can I get you to speak up a little bit? I'm having difficulty understanding.
Sure, is this better?
Try. All right. What was your question again?
I said, how many of you would like your flood insurance premiums to go down?
I currently don't have flood insurance, but I'm going to have to now.
Well, we'll chat about that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I just heard about this at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I was unaware of this. Nobody ever sent me any mail telling me that they're going to do this. And then I was told the meeting was at 7 o'clock, not 6. So I've missed out on all the action here, haven't I?
We'll help you out as much as we can.
Please do.
Okay. So risk rating 2.0 went into effect October 1st. And as I've mentioned, it fundamentally changes how flood insurance premiums are determined. Okay? So it's no longer about are you above or below the base flood. It's no longer about are you inside or outside of the floodplain. It's about how far away are you from the river. How high have you elevated relative to the river? How much have you done to mitigate any flood hazards with your home? Do you have flood vents? If you have a crawl space, have you elevated above the ground around you? There's about 25 different variables that they look at. I like to think of it as how auto insurance used to be and what it is today. So auto insurance used to be, I want $50,000 in coverage on my car. And they said, okay, it's X amount. It's $100 a month. And then they came out and said, well, we're going to change this up. The actuaries have gotten a hold of our policies, and now we want to know what color is your car? How many miles do you put on it per year? How old is it? Have you had an accident before? Flood insurance is going that way. They're going to be looking at, have you had prior claims? Are you a substantially damaged home? Do you have repetitive loss? And they're going to, they have their magic formula where they come up with a premium, and that's going to be your full risk premium. For folks who have preferred risk policies, which are outside the floodplain, and you have a fantastic rate right now, okay, that policy is going away. They have discontinued preferred risk policies. And so you need to chat with your insurance agent or your lender who can guide you to their insurance agent to help you understand how your premiums are going to change. Most people are going to see an increase in their premiums. But for those who see a decrease in their premiums, they can take advantage of that decrease immediately. So if you have flood insurance and it's renewing between October 1st and April 1st, you have the option to either stay in the program that you are in for 1 year or you can renew under the new system. And you have that option if you renew between October and April. If you renew after April 1st of 2022, you will have to go into the new system. If you choose to go into the new rating system before then, I would advise you to chat with your insurance agent, find out what your options are going to be, because you're going to see that they're going to give you your new full risk premium rate. And then so they're going to show you what you're at now, they're going to show you what you're going to be, and then they're going to show you it's going to be 7, 2, 3, 10 years for you to get to the full premium rate. They're not going to hit you from one year to the next. They're not going to go, okay, you go from $1,000 a year to $10,000 a year. They're not going to hit you from year to year. The federal legislature mandated they can only increase 18% per year. So you're going to be on what they call this glide path up until you get to the full premium rate. And so let's say you're at $1,000, the next year you're at $1,180. The next year after that, you're at $1,360, and it's going to keep going until you get to that full risk rate. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, can that progression be interrupted if you contact your insurance agent and you go over the answers to the 25 little questions? Will that change anything? Or is it going to go up at that normal progression no matter what?
So,
You're saying contact your insurance agent
yes.
to go over those 25 factors?
So, so my recommendation is you contact them to help understand what your full premium could be. Okay?
The answers to the 25 questions don't matter?
They do, and he or she may walk through some of them with you. Some of them we have no control over, okay, because they're determined by FEMA's system. We only have a control over a few things, and those things are the things that we can actually do on our properties and to our homes. So if a home is, if you have a home with a crawl space underneath it, but it has no flood vents to allow the water to flow through, but you come back and you say, okay, I've added a bunch of flood vents, then they're going to come back and they're going to rerun your premium, and then your premium's going to come down a little bit. Yes, sir.
In the risk rating system that they're going to enact, do they consider historical data such as whether you've been flooded ever, or whether you have filed a claim? Do they consider that as in determining your risk?
They do, but they have special rules. So they're only going to look back 10 years. It's a rolling 10-year window. And so if you had claims, it's 2021 right now, if you had claims in 2010, they're not going to count against you. If you had claims in 2013, they will. Yes, ma'am.
By the same factors, then if you've never ever had a claim, they're not looking back past 10 years.
Correct.
So forever doesn't matter, just the last 10 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So just because we're recording this and for our audience who may watch later, she's asking about, okay, are they going to ask for the full history from the beginning of time like they have been, or are they just going to limit to 10 years? And they're just going to limit to 10 years. Okay, they're also going to give you one freebie on a prior claim. So if you have one claim before, they're not going to penalize you. Yes, sir.
When you say claim, are you talking about flood claim on your insurance?
Yes.
Any insurance claim?
No, flood insurance claim. So we're specifically talking about flood insurance here. Yeah. And just so you know, if you don't already know, homeowners does not cover flood. Okay? And so if you have a water heater that bursts, That's going to be on your homeowner's insurance, not your flood insurance. But if Hurricane Harvey comes through, that's your flood insurance, not your homeowner's. And so back to your question about prior claims, they're going to give you one freebie. And then if you get another claim above a certain dollar amount after the new program goes into effect, then they may apply a prior claim surcharge. And I know right now, if you do have prior claims, there are surcharges related to that. But those are now, if I could remember correctly here, those surcharges are only going to apply until you get a new claim, and then they roll it all into the new system. So you might pay less in surcharges right now if you have prior claims than you may in the future. Yes, sir.
Do you work for the city of Bastrop or Bastrop County?
I work for Bastrop County. I'm the floodplain administrator. Yep. Where'd the clicker go? Ah, she's got the clicker. Okay. So another thing to consider is that we have a 10% discount as participants in the community rating system. Previously, that only applied to homes and structures within the floodplain. That's now being expanded to all structures in the county. So not in the city because they don't participate yet. But when they do, it will apply. So if you have a preferred risk policy right now, you don't get the 10% discount. But when you jump over into the new system with the new full risk premium, you will receive the 10% discount.
Is that an open-ended discount, or does it turn into a pumpkin after a couple of years?
That 10% discount is good for the life of the policy. Okay, so all of these changes don't affect our floodplain management policies. You're still going to have to elevate. You're still going to have to put in flood vents as required by our county and city orders and ordinances. Okay, a few things to remember. We're almost done here. Are you improving your property? Are you doing drainage improvements? Are you adding a barn? Are you adding a house? Are you going to be doing a bunch of land clearing? Are you putting in a new pond? If you are, odds are you need a development permit with the county that's inside or outside of the floodplain. And same with the city. You'll need to get a development permit if it's in the floodplain or a building permit with the city. Okay. It's hurricane season, and thank goodness we haven't had any yet, and I hope we don't for the rest of the season. But if we do, or we get heavy rains, remember, turn around, don't drown. And here's something to think about again. Only 6% of homes in the floodplain in Bastrop County have flood insurance. And they've paid out $3.6 million in claims. Think about the other 94% of homes in the floodplain that don't have flood insurance. Think about your friends. Think about your family. Think about their homes, their livelihood, and how it could help them to have flood insurance so that they could rebuild if they flood. Okay. Another question is, do you live near a river? And I know some of y'all do, and you probably watch those river gauges pretty closely. Or you live near a creek like Cedar Creek, Walnut Creek, Piney Creek. Or you live in a low-lying area, perhaps over, on the flats, kind of in Tahitian Village, or some other low-lying areas. So you'd be amazed, but if you live in an area like that, you might be subject to flooding. And you need to be aware of that risk. Okay, remember, don't be a hoot, don't pollute. We want a clean community. We want to see, green grass, not a bunch of beer cans or trash on the highway. Okay, keep culverts clear. So if somebody, trash, filling up a culvert, plugging up a culvert, somebody dumping a bunch of dirt on their yard, and then they all that washes off into the culvert and fills up the culvert. Those are things that we're concerned about. Just remember, think ahead, be smart, and thank you guys for coming out today. Okay. And with that, if you have any further questions, we're happy to answer.